Hey there, so today we're going to be taking a look at Sons of the Forest running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U, but first we're going to take a look at it running on all of the different memory configurations that I can have right now. So we're going to take a look at 8GB of RAM, 12GB of RAM, and 16GB of RAM. Now all of these are going to be dual channel configurations, obviously with the 12GB one being a mismatch of an 8GB stick and a 4GB stick. Both sticks are rated for the same speed though, and we're going to see what the performance difference is across different TDPs with the different memory configurations. So let's take a look at that right now. But first, if you're on the market right now for some cheap games, check out aniba.com. I've been using their service for years now. They have a wide selection of different games at very, very low prices for a wide variety of different systems, not just PC. You also have access to console games, you have access to DLC, you have access to a wide variety of different gift cards and games. And the best part is they have different regions as well, so you can always find something that will work for you on here. So check them out down below. They are one of my favorite places to go to actually buy games. I have a gigantic library of games that I pretty much use for testing, and Aniba is one of the sites that actually lets me be able to do that at a cost-effective way. I've been using their service for years now, so I highly recommend them. Check out the link down below. So starting things off, we have here the 8GB configuration from the get-go, struggling with 1% lows, while the 12GB configuration does have noticeably better 1% lows right now. But the thing you got to pay attention to is the RAM usage across all of them. We're pretty much in all scenarios getting practically maxed out in terms of the amount of RAM that we're utilizing. And it might be starting to get to the point where we might be in an era where integrated graphics might actually require systems that have 32GB of RAM just to be able to keep up. As it stands right now, 12GB and 16GB are very close in terms of performance, though there still seems to be a noticeable gap between the two. But this game really seems to enjoy pushing both the GPU and the CPU, as well as utilizing a crap ton of RAM. So this is a surprisingly heavy game, but let's look at what happens when we actually raise the TDP on all these configurations. As you can see here, with 25 watts being pumped on all of these configurations here, you can see that it is not enough to save the 8GB of RAM. The 1% lows are still a disaster there. Even our averages are suffering pretty greatly there as well. With 12GB, it is a vast improvement over where it was at with 8GB, but our 1% lows are still struggling there. But at least our FPS average is very, very close to a 30 FPS range, but it is below that. Now, once we go to 16GB of RAM, you can see that we're still being maxed out in terms of RAM utilization here, but we are now getting an above 30 FPS average, but our 1% lows are still falling into the mid-20s. So you can see that there is a noticeable improvement in terms of 1% lows across the board as you go up in RAM. So I would be very curious to see what 32GB of RAM would actually end up doing here. Of course, if we go absolutely all out and pump all of these different configurations with a whole 30 watts of TDP, you can see here that all systems pretty much end up using a good bit of that extra TDP. But in general, again, 8GB of RAM, there's no salvaging it here. Those 1% lows are going to continue to be a problem, and that is going to bring down your averages pretty noticeably. 12GB of RAM is still having 1% low issues, but our averages are now at a very, very decent range, and it has pretty much closed the gap pretty noticeably with the 16GB configuration. You can see right now that the 16GB of RAM configuration right now is actually using noticeably less RAM than it was before. It all really just depends on what exactly you're doing on the map and what is going on around you. Pretty much after my character just went to sleep and it loaded in a new day, the RAM usage dropped. But in general, we're still utilizing a vast majority of the RAM on the system itself. And remember that Windows needs to use some of that RAM to actually function in the background. So getting that close to the edge can really start to make the system noticeably worse to use. But in general, once we actually pump in the full 30 watts, the 12GB configuration and 16GB configuration actually started to perform so similarly to each other. So it seems like raising the TDP can actually close the gap, at least when it comes to that kind of memory configuration. Nothing can salvage 8GB. But the most playable experience was definitely to have the 16 gigabytes of RAM and to be able to raise the TDP all the way up to 30 watts. At this point, we're getting about a 30 FPS average. And keep in mind that we are running the game with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR on top of that. And this is pretty much FSR at like the performance preset. It has a target FPS of 60, and we're not even getting anywhere near that. So I'm guessing FSR is just doing the best that it can and is just struggling here. So this is about the most playable that you can get it to be. It's certainly doable. You're going to be able to play this perfectly fine, especially if you don't have the FPS counter up. You're going to be able to do this. It's just visually speaking, it does look noticeably bad. So I can understand if you just don't want anything to do with this, but I would recommend going in with tampered expectations if you actually do plan on playing it on this system. And be sure to have 16 gigabytes of RAM at a minimum. And thinking about upgrading to 32 might not be a bad move. If getting a new system is just that out of your budget, throwing 32 gigabytes of RAM in there might just be enough to make the whole experience of playing some of your favorite games or newer titles out there just that much better. Remember, if you can have consistent 1% lows, it makes a 30 FPS gaming experience just that much better. But anyways, I will catch you guys in the next one.